started making this work last year, very shortly after giving birth to my daughter, Isla. There's something about giving birth and being pregnant that's a very confusing and disorientating experience, and it's hard to almost distill that into artwork in the way that you would do with other experiences. So in this kind of state of mind of wanting to make something about that feeling but not quite knowing how to approach it, I began prompting an AI model with mother and child and seeing what it put out. In lots of ways it looked a lot like images from art history. It was very familiar, but the mistakes it made felt to me very real in an odd way. So it would put out images of mother and child, but the mother and child would kind of be like melded together. There would be some confusion about what was the mother's body and what was the child's body, because giving birth is this odd experience where you've grown a baby in your body and the kind of normal distinctions of sort of self and other fall apart. This visual representation of that, where the literal sense of your body and the baby's body becomes merged and confused, seemed to make a lot of sense to me. So there was something in the mistakes that the AI was making that were fascinating to me. I took quite a lot of that original imagery and started to kind of rework it, make drawings myself and work with the AI in part to generate some of the things in my mind's eye. And then through some of the ways that it generated and the mistakes that it made, I started to play off the mistakes and incorporate that into the imagery. So the paintings are kind of a collaboration almost with the AI. So in part, there are things that I have created very intentionally, and then there's mistakes that come in there where you get these kind of multiple limbs and things that just don't seem totally right. A lot of the imagery I was taking from was Rococo, so I was prompting the AI with Francois Boucher, so famous French Rococo artist who makes these very idealized scenes of kind of bodies and almost sort of utopian landscapes. I was also mashing that up with balloons and presents and ribbons, colours and objects which are associated with baby showers or the kind of imagery around babies. So the paintings have a very feminine aesthetic, but there's something unsettling in it as well. So surface level beauty, but in a lot of my work, something that kind of throws you off and unsettles that initial impression. So the process for making this work was in part using AI, and I've been thinking a lot about how we think about AI in relation to the history of art and in relation to how artists work with machines. I think there's a kind of prescribed idea of how we think about that and talk about that, which is more the Andy Warhol idea where you take an image and then the machine reproduces it. I think with AI it's just something completely different altogether, and it almost needs a totally different way of thinking about it. It's much less like something you give to a machine and it reproduces, and it's much more like, as an artist, you're working with a collaborator, and a collaborator who can understand what you want, can work that through, can make mistakes, you can prompt it to correct those mistakes. So in that sense, this distinction between what you feed in and what comes out is very blurred, and it's much harder to make a distinction between the hand of the artist and the hand of the machine. And to me that's kind of fascinating, and it's much more in line with, I think, the effect that AI technology is having and is going to have in our world, that it's not clear exactly what is done by an AI and what is done by a human. So I've been thinking a lot about that and this kind of impact that AI is going to have on art and the way that we think and the way that we talk about art and production. I'm interested not just in the reality of AI, but in the perception of it. And I think there is a kind of public perception of AI, or sort of mass media perception, which oscillates between the kind of dream of AI, which is this machine that can do the things that we do only better, and it can help us and speed things up and optimize our lives. And then there's the fear of the AI, which is the fear that it will take over and kill us all. And I think that these fears can kind of become hyperbolic and overblown and often don't really relate to the reality of the technology. But there's something in them in their own right that I think is worth exploring. What I really love about a lot of the stuff that the AI puts out is that it's deeply unsettling, but often in a way that's quite subtle. So the image on the surface often looks kind of familiar, like you've seen it before, you can tell where it's come from. But then you look a bit closer and there's just something a bit off about it. Like somebody's got too many fingers, or there's just like a quality that it has that's just not quite right. And to me, this is like exactly artistically what I've been trying to do for years, which is to create images that look on the surface quite benign, but then beneath the surface, or in some ways you kind of go closer and look closer, things are revealed to you which aren't quite right. So I'm really drawn to the potential for what the mistakes of AI can do. This work is a little bit more personal than some of my other works in that it's coming from the experience of being a mother and a mother of 2 little girls. But at the same time, these images are not of my children per se. They are partly children, but they also look a little bit like dolls, which is intentional, and I want to almost explore this dissonance between the real experience of having children and giving birth, and then the kind of imagery and culture of babies and childhood and much of the kind of objects and colours that are associated with it. The process for making these works is quite complex. I think there's a perception with AI that you just press a button and something comes out. With these, it's much more of a kind of collaboration. So what I've done is started out with an image in my mind's eye or something I wanted to create, and I've asked in so many ways for the AI to make that for me. In the process, the AI makes a lot of mistakes, which to me are kind of the fun bit, because that's the bit that you as an artist don't intend. And then I've incorporated those mistakes and reworked it, reprocessed it in this circular way until eventually I've got an image that I feel is the final composition. At that point, I then paint over the image in Photoshop using a paintbrush which simulates like a real paintbrush. Those images are then printed onto canvas, stretched, and then painted onto again, so with acrylic varnish and oil paint, so that the final objects feel very much like real paintings. And the intention is that when you look at it, you wouldn't necessarily know that it had been digitally made. So there's an illusionary quality to it where it tricks you into thinking that it is a real painting. To me, that's intentional, and it's something that I am playing with a lot in my work. For example, my most recent film, Duck, uses deepfake technology as an exploration of this idea of truth and whether or not you can trust an image. I think quite a lot about dynamics of power in an artwork, and a lot of my work deals with cuteness, and I think cuteness is interesting to me because it's a way that humans have aestheticized powerlessness. Since having had children, I've developed quite a different relationship to cuteness. I think you can have an academic relationship to it before children, but the minute you have kids, it's like you're deep in the trenches of it. I have this experience quite a lot when you're woken up in the middle of the night by a baby, where you wonder, like, God, would I get out of bed and feed you if you weren't so cute? Like, there's a sense that cuteness has this kind of power over you. So it's both powerless and yet powerful. And there's something in that inversion that I play with in my work, where you're presented with something that feels submissive or benign, or is very much in the language of femininity, but then there's a quality that it has, or something literally within the content that throws you off and is threatening or potentially powerful. So I'm always thinking about that dynamic as a viewer, so your relationship to the work, and whether you perceive yourself as kind of the work is submissive to you, or if the work can kind of have some power or threat, hold a kind of threat over you. Rococo imagery and Rococo painting is often very comfortable. It's very idealized and beautiful, and it takes you into this seductive world that seems kind of impenetrable by reality. With these paintings, I want to add in a sense of disquietude into that world. So a lot of the expressions on the faces of the characters, they look a little bit uneasy, like there's something on their mind. or there's something about their experience that isn't quite right. In a lot of the imagery, there's this feeling of the sea or water kind of encroaching onto the land. So at times it kind of spills into interior environments. I'm taking you into these idealized worlds, but there's this sense of a kind of latent threat, or there's this sense that there's something that's not quite there or not quite right about the world that you're in. There's these drip characters that are like these little cartoons that are either kind of smiling or grimacing, that sit outside of the world of the painting. So there's a shadow dropped off them that makes it look as if that they're not within the picture plane of the painting. To me, I wanted them to almost be casting judgment. They are a viewer outside of the world looking in. My daughter's been doing these little drawings of like a face where the mouth connects onto the eyes, which I'm guessing like every child goes through a phase where they draw this little symbol. I've always had this smiley face in my work, so I thought it was fun to incorporate this like childish version of that. She draws them everywhere. Like she drew one on my shoe the other day, and she like draws them in little bits of paper and like slips them under bits of furniture. So incorporated in this work are these like childish drawings. And oddly, there's something about an experience of watching my daughter draw and the decisions she makes, which you're looking at them and being like, God, yeah, I would never think to do that. That is quite similar to working with an AI, where you ask an AI to do something and then it pops something out that is like, feels slightly illogical, but kind of creative and inspiring.